Also deleted. Okay, so here we go. Hello, everyone. We've got a bit of a program change here. Uh, my co-host, the Christian Apologist 2024, um, had something come up, so he's not going to be making it tonight. I hope he doesn't mind my trying to stick to the program as usual. Sometimes people don't like that, but I think we have understanding that this show must go on. We both feel that way, so this shouldn't be an issue. At any rate, I'm going to do a major program change today. I did have some things lined up, but since my co-host isn't here, I'm going to go ahead and not cover as much as we're going to cover. We'll do a shorter stream today, um, and then we'll basically kind of let it flow, as they say. At any rate, joining me is Chordiac. Um, to be honest with you, I met Chordiac not that long ago, maybe a couple days ago, and we had a very long but very fascinating, intriguing discussion. I appreciate folks that like to talk things through and think things through and have a genuine open mind, as they say. Um, without further ado, Chordiac, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Oh yeah, thank you, Nicodemus. Yeah, I'm glad to be here, man. Yeah, we had a nice conversation the other day. First of all, my name is Chordiac. I'm from Sweden, and yeah, I met Nicodemus just the other day, and he told me he wanted to do this live stream and wanted, um, a guest to interview or maybe just talk to in general, right? So I thought, why not?
Yeah. And this, like I said, this is a great opportunity to get you on. I wanted to ask you that the other day when we spoke, if you wanted to come on or not. So, but yeah, here we are. Door closes and another one opens. Um, yeah, so I don't want to dox you too much. I want to be very careful with what you share because there's a lot of crazies out there. So we want to be careful. You never know how someone might react to what we say, unfortunately. But you said some really interesting things the other day. There's a lot of things that we can cover, but I really still want to focus on censorship in general today. Could you share with us something that might have impacted you personally when it comes to censorship um, in general?
Well, so if you remember our last conversation, the things I focus on with these kind of topics is always like some kind of like core knowledge that shines through e- every part of the area. And so what I've come to understand is that if you allow free speech to its ultimate end, truth always prevails, right?
Here we are.
But if you manage to alter the battlefield of ideas
Mm.
through censorship, you can actually promote falsehood coming out on top instead of truth. And so I know that you're mostly interested, or at least to a high degree interested in, and it says here in the description as well, the slandering of Christian ethics
Mm.
in today's media,
Yes,
right?
especially
And that's definitely something that I've noticed as well. I'm sorry.
yes, yeah, and I really appreciate that about you. Not too many people, even Christians, are willing to acknowledge that. It kills me. So I really appreciate that you were aware of that and how it affected you, which was I was blown away by. Would you like to share that with us, or is that too much information?
No, no, not at all. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, to be honest, to see how the Christians can be demonized and mocked. But if you try to do the same with Islam, for example, people will actually jump on and call you racist.
Yeah.
Of course, they are ignorant. Being Muslim is not a race, ideology, or a religion,
Then there's that.
right? But
Yeah.
yeah, and so you have these religions with, much more horrible, horrific ideas that is allowed to be spread and even protected. Meanwhile, Christians are being dragged to the dirt, called pedophiles and all of this stuff if they happen to be Catholics, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, we have a religion that actively their role model actually have sex with young children, and many of his following today have sex with young children, and somehow criticizing them for that can be well a point of censorship in some situations, right?
Mm.
So there's an unevenness there that really shines through clearly.
And that we see that way too often. It's mind blowing, especially when we're talking about the West, as they say, civilized societies that make it a point to take care of one another. You know, they emphasize that and so on. When they rather show quote unquote solidarity with an ideology that goes out of its way to oppress people. I mean, to this day they have slavery, as you mentioned. It's the whole, the Aisha thing and so on. When it comes to unnatural sexual relations, I mean, that list goes on, really. Um, Warmongering, uh, yeah, the subjugation, zakat, and then here's the thing, though. Unless you're in these circles, these Christian apologists or Christian polemics that are exposing these things about Islam, people don't know. We're raised, I'm say we, people like me, are raised to believe the exact opposite of reality. And that's basically touching on what you were saying earlier. How if you have one set of information that is pushing one narrative, but it's a false narrative, and only that is, again, the exact opposite of what's true, then you have a lot of people that are being led in the wrong direction, that are doing the wrong things, and they don't even realize it. And
Yeah,
I've,
we have a big problem with people who don't care about verifying what is they're following, right? They say if my life is good enough, I'll just go on trusting. Um, because it's easier for me if I just go with the grain, right? The waves.
yeah, that's exactly it. We've been pacified. Um, the word escapes me, but yeah, basically we don't want to lose anything. We don't want to lose our iPhone. We don't want to lose our internet access, right? Because of all the censorship. That's what we're talking about today. This fear of, oh my, I might get my comment blocked or my video blocked, or I might lose access to Fascist Book for a month, you know, because of being honest about severe oppression that everyone I know is being subjected to. I mean, yeah, I think the problem here is, and this is very, I mean, Yuri Bezmenov, easy for me to say, but he really did a great job exposing that, talking about how Russian communism took place with the gulags, the conditioning, the psychological aspects of it, the emotional um, control they used, the devices they used, how, and especially like this part, how your neighbor was being used as an instrument to enforce that communism and that ideology. It wasn't just the behaviors, it was the belief. And that's what the gulags were about. You were either part of that militant, oppressive uh, movement, or you were isolated, ostracized, imprisoned, tortured, literally. And in that case, you would either submit, finally submit, they would either break you and you would give in and join their ranks, or they would kill you. I mean, if that's not fascism, I don't know what is it.
Yeah.
So,
The problem is that it becomes so easy for the individual to rationalize that action of being with the oppressors because they have a choice of being oppressed or being an oppressor. That kind of seems like a valid choice to join them, right? Rather than to be at the front end, because after all, that comes down to survival.
yeah, but it's a catch 22. I mean, that's the trick. They have you believing that if you do this, or I should say, you have to do this in order to survive. But the reality is, in order to survive, we have to combat it. We have to stop it and overcome it. I mean, you don't survive by allowing yourself to be subjected to fascism or joining fascism, thinking that'll join you. Again, Yuri Bizmenov also addressed this, and he addressed this very well, and he coined it. He used the label that many of us use these days, quote unquote, useful idiot. He said the useful idiots feel like they're safe because they're being nice soldiers. But at the end of the day, as soon as they outlive their usefulness, they too are terminated. Or even if they become a threat, if they become too close to the truth, again, they are terminated. Either way. So that's what we're seeing. Yeah, in these days, especially during the 2020 lockdown, we saw neighbors turning on each other, pushing things that were the exact opposite of what was healthy. We know this now because of lawsuits that came out, government hearings. All of these things came out. Already, the whistleblowers before were already trying to warn everyone. But of course, that brings us to the censorship. Mass media, especially the internet, was, well, one was locking us down. When everyone had to have a cell phone and so on wherever they went, so they monitored everything we were doing via www or mobile www. But also, you were not allowed to speak about the obvious. You were not allowed to speak about the obvious, the evident, stuff that can be proven, stuff that we've known all our lives, stuff that insiders were talking about, scientists, medical professionals. They were being silenced. And to this day, we're being distracted by, I don't know what the latest thing is. Some rapper, did this, or some movie star did that. As if that's supposed to be relevant, or the rhinos or neocons are fighting with liberals, and that's supposed to somehow reflect me and who I am, and all these nonsensical things. Even this war, I suspect. This centuries upon centuries old war between Judaism and Islam. you know, all of a sudden, this buzzworthiness, the only thing we're talking about, as if it never existed before. Same thing with Russia and Ukraine, as if that was like something new. That didn't happen a couple of years ago. That too is really not only decades old, it's centuries old. I mean, that's not a new thing. But that's all people talk about. And then you were forced in this dichotomy. You had to choose either Russia or Ukraine. You couldn't be, no, they're both bad. You couldn't say that, right? So these are all part of control devices to keep us distracted, to keep us from not fighting.
I think more plainly, it will be either Russia's narrative or America's. Russia or America.
Well, I've got my own, and this is something that, yeah, I mean, yeah. So this is something that I'm actually combating and realizing myself later in life with all this research in Hollywood. Who is controlling the narrative, or who has been controlling the narrative for at least over a century? These days, I suspect it's BRICS. But I suspect that a certain group that we're not allowed to talk about, that wear these special hats, yeah, they basically created a golem that has gone out of control. It's something they can no longer control because they don't have as much money as the Muslims do, or the Chinese do, or so on. And so, I mean, as we saw even in America, something that was very public was the whole Kennedy's assassination. They were addressing the infiltration of communism in America, which was common throughout Europe, by the way, post-World War II, or before that. And for their troubles, they got assassinated. And ever since then, media has gone, I mean, exponentially down the drain. It's become really, really wretched. And it's also become digressive, just like Yuri Bezmenov warned. The social structure has been completely corrupted. And the home has been destroyed. Again, I believe he spoke about that too. I could be wrong. I mean, I might be mixing memories there, but if it's kind of like, forgive me for this example here, but it's like Aesop's fable of they call it bundle of sticks in English, but really it's bundle of straw. And that really puts it in perspective. Like if you have straw, like if one little piece of straw is flimsy, you can do anything you want with it. But if you get a bundle of straw, all of a sudden it becomes more difficult to break, to destroy. Or if you prefer sticks, either way. So that's what happens
Works
here.
the same.
Sorry, go ahead.
I said no. Yeah, it works the same whether it's straw or sticks, but it's more impressive with the straw because they are tend to be more bendy and flimsy.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what they've done to us. I mean, even Hollywood itself has a line that says, "The lone wolf makes easy prey." So you can be, as bad as you want to be, but if you're alone, you're alone. You can't fight all these powers, and that's what their point is. They've pit us against each other. For example, when you go into any platform, they make it almost it's in your face, almost I don't say mandatory, but definitely coerce you into uh, wanting to block people or yeah, censor them somehow. I mean that in itself is communist, is it not? That your neighbor censoring what you do.
Well, in one way, they done something very similar, right? Like, and that's about racism, right?
Mm.
They've conditioned people that once you invoke the holy word of racism upon someone, this is the time where you no longer have to be fair in a debate or hear the other side or anything like that, right? And you can do this by bringing incredibly stupid racist to up onto the floor and show people how stupid they are over and over and over again in order to reinforce this kind of idea
Mm.
that every time eventually the speaker who's
Well,
talking to the racist will just come to the conclusion that you
well, they
know
just feel like
there's no use in talking to this person. If you are racist, that's the end of the line, right?
yeah,
So they have a way of silencing people by invoking this word of racist. They think that's a valid reason to never have an open dialogue.
right.
So that's being heavily used for censorship.
And I find this fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of things, a lot of labels you cannot use in socialist media without getting pinged or censored or attacked for some reason. One of them is the N word. And I'm not talking about nigga, like the rap songs, right? I'm talking about not actually. Why can't we say that? I mean, are we supposed to be against Nazism? And so, therefore, why would we not be allowed to talk about it and dispel it, like the Jews have in their media for so long? Why are we not allowed to say it? That being said, someone on, let's say, in my camp, a Christian, that dispels anything like you just mentioned, like racism. If I say things like, okay, you know what, that's not necessarily real. It's not okay to hate on um, Euro trash is one label, or white Europeans. That's kind of ugly. That's kind of whatever. All of a sudden they call you, you're a Nazi. That's the response. You're a Nazi. Like what is going on here?
Yes, it's exactly the same thing. And I'm not saying, by the way, that like that racism, like this idea that something people cannot control, how they were born or whatever, is a good thing. But what I'm saying is that whether or not this person actually is a racist,
Right.
once you've declared him to be a racist, you no longer even have to listen to him,
Right.
right? Maybe he's not a racist. You will never know, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. That's the reaction you get. You get the visceral attack, followed by shutting it down. The censorship. They'll either, they'll hang up, they'll block you, they'll run off, as we see the Muslims do when they're asked about their Quran or their Hadith or anything like that. They'll attack you, or then they'll run off if you stand your ground. Um, yeah, and it's tragic. Again, that is acting out what we discussed before with the communism, the Russian communism, and the gulags and all that. That's exactly what's happening, but it's just happening in a virtual reality. It's mind blowing, and it's happening exponentially so.
I've had a friend of mine. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
No, I was going to say I have a friend of mine who has been saying for a long time. I've never really verified it for myself, but he seems to be kind of on the same track as you, and he says he believes that the communist has infected, its way all the way to the American propaganda machine, all the way to the American media, basically, and is still destroying things, right? And he even sees that some of the systems and universities, like wasting people's time and money, and tax dollar who make courses about stuff like lesbian dancing, or how to teach your son to be queer. He thinks it all kind of flows together with this rhetoric that the communists specifically created to destabilize the nation from the inside out. So
Yes,
that's what he's saying,
I
and
could, I
it's
completely.
interesting to listen to him sometimes. But
Oh, so he has his own channel.
no, 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 no. I talked to him personally.
I
And
see. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. As an adult, looking into all these things, and now having the ability to look back, to have the hindsight, I completely agree with what he's saying. That's exactly what I see too, and it's shocking. It's embarrassing as an American, as one of its biggest victims. It's actually embarrassing for me to admit it, but it's got to be talked about because it's only getting worse, and it's getting worse really bad. Because here's the other problem. So now, since the lockdown, we've all been forced, literally forced. I can't even say coerced. It's worse than coercion. We're forced to be online, to be inside the homes, and then therefore, what are you going to do? You're going to get on the internet and try to find people to interact with, or you suffer completely from depression. Right? That's a whole other aspect. But I don't want to get off on a tangent. And so our behaviors changed, our leisure changed. We were also forced to start purchasing more online. Again, to pay the bills, pay your standard bills, began requiring a code, an irregular code. You had to ping your code on a regular basis on all these different accounts, even some bank accounts were requiring that. So, I mean, when they have that much control with just the push of a button, and they're threatening things, and they're constantly turning off your electricity, and even openly threatening in some states in America that if you don't comply, we will turn off your power. Um, when that kind of fascism is taking place, and after the fact, even though there's hearings, there's civil suits, there's government hearings that brings to light all these facts, yet nobody, not a single soul, goes to prison. I mean, how do you react to that other than being afraid that, well, you know what, the censorship is going to continue, and therefore I'll self censorship? I'll make sure that I don't say anything because I don't want to lose my quote unquote privileges.
right. Actually, we have something similar that's been happening in Sweden. Sweden was aiming their sights on being the first cashless society in all the world. But actually, now, very recently, the new government that's in place now, a more right leaning government, they've just issued that they're gonna stop. They're gonna force stores of different kinds to accept cash payment
Oh,
in
cool.
order to prevent this. So we're seeing a completely like a 180 change on that.
That's
That's
great.
what's happening now.
And forgive me, I know how you feel about people being forced to do things, but I mean, we were already forced to do the opposite. So why not counter it and force freedom again? And when you say forced, I imagine those places they have to use cash, but they can still use the other options, or is it cash only?
No, no, no. This is actually because if you think about it, this is your money. This is your way of paying for things, right? And you should be able to own yourself what it is you own, rather than just renting it from the government and not really owning it. Because otherwise, it's about your safety, the safety of your private property, right? That's why you need to be able to have cash, something that each individual tangibly can hold in their hands, right?
Yeah,
If we go full digital, now all of a sudden the government will have the power to simply cut off your access to your belongings,
exactly.
right? So this is not a kind of oppressive force. This is just a protection of a vital freedom,
Yeah.
right? Private property.
Well, the cutting off your access to your own assets thing was an issue during the lockdown. We saw that especially with the truckers, that coalition in Canada, and that's exactly what they were doing. All these different accounts, including bank accounts, were being shut down for those protesters. That's horrendous. Um, to this day, I'm still
I
waiting
heard
for,
about that.
yeah, I'm still waiting for a single soul to go to prison for all these insanely illegal things that they did, which led to so many people not only losing their livelihoods, all these livelihoods were destroyed, all this health was decimated, physical, mental, spiritual, if I may, but also people were so distraught, so oppressed that they were turning to suicide. In fact, even hunger pains, people were starving. Things were so economically bad that they felt like suicide was the only way out, and not too many people talk about that. So it was extremely lethal. Just the lockdown dictates in themselves. They were diabolically backward. They were the exact opposite of what we were supposed to be doing for our health. And this again is documented in all these core things, but also by medical professionals the entire time that were silenced. That sites like Snopes were saying, well, this is disinformation. And people that were buying into completely anything that mass media said about it were militantly pushing. I mean, how many people did we see, not only in videos online, but personally, harassing other people, whether or not they were wearing a mask all the way up to their eyeballs? Um, you're not supposed to be even wearing a mask to begin with. That makes no sense. They're just all wrong all around for so many reasons. Um, I mean, I'll share a personal story. I like to do that, just to drive it home. I was speaking to my father because the nursing homes were locked down, and I'm embarrassed to admit he was in a nursing home. I had no control over that, unfortunately. Um, so they were completely imprisoned in these nursing homes at the time. They were not even letting visitors to come and visit them. And I was speaking to him on the phone, and everyone at that point, this was in 2021, and everyone was being forced to start vaxing. Not everyone, but pretty much. I mean, even children in some countries, and at least by 2022, they were being forced to vax, or they couldn't live in society. They were ostracized. So everyone was vaxxed, everyone was isolated, but I couldn't even speak to the man on the phone without the nurse coming in and yelling at him because his muzzle wasn't all the way up to his eyeballs. Why is he vaxxed if he's still got to be isolated and muzzled? And then yelled at, treated like some kind of criminal because he's on the phone. He doesn't have his muzzle all the way up.
It should be pretty easy, like plain for people to understand. Like one of the vital freedoms of a human being would be, first of all, to speak your mind, the censorship, right? And second of all, control what comes into your body.
Right,
Do I have the right to force feed you something you don't want to eat? Or do I have the right to push something into your bloodstream, right?
right,
Like these are clear violations of the individual, right?
yeah,
And a collective is nothing but a group of individuals, right? So it's all built from there. If you try to sacrifice the individual for the collective against their choice, of course, people can sacrifice themselves willingly. I don't have a problem with that. But if you try to forcefully sacrifice an individual to the collective, you are the same as barbarians we've been having, over 2,000, 3,000 years ago.
well, that's
Because
murder.
that's what they were doing with human sacrifice.
Yeah, that's murder. That's by definition murder. And let me just go back now to what you just said in the back of the forcing lethal chemicals into your veins. Now, isn't that again? Isn't it interesting how we can't say Nazi, right? Or we can't even say. I'm finding out some people are claiming that you can't even say the Holocaust anymore for some reason. What? Um, what? Why
Uh,
not?
I've never had that problem.
Yeah.
I've never had that problem in my life.
Well, some people online are saying you
I
can't
say
say.
I say both of those things.
Yeah. Well, I personally say whatever, even though I'm trying to be careful. I feel like we're discussing an important topic, so I want this one to get through as much as possible. But usually, yeah, I let them fly. Just and if they censor me, then next platform up. But the point is this, that the during again 2020, after the lockdown, and then the forced, and I've got another story about that too, about the forced lethal serums. But lo and behold, people are complaining. Content creators are complaining that they're getting censored because they use the N word, and by N word again I mean Nazi, and then the Holocaust thing. You can't.
If you're, hang on a second. If you're so afraid of saying it, then why would you put it in the header of your YouTube video? I mean, the word is right there. So
Because I'm nuts.
obviously you can both write and say.
Yeah, I mean, here's the other thing. Right now, I have. I think it's because it's my millions of subscribers is that I have the power to overcome it. No, I'm just kidding. I have the exact opposite. I'm the exact other extreme of that spectrum. So right now, I think I'm just going under the radar. But as soon as a schmuck comes along and hears what I have to say, all that's going to change, I'm sure. So at this point, I'm trying to be as open and candid as I can while I still can. And whoever hears it, cool. Yeah, and well, I'll leave it at that. Well, like I said, when they come after me, at that point, it'll be the next platform up. But yeah, I mean, basically, that was the 21st century Holocaust, and there was hearings about it, but no one again is going. No one is held accountable. I mean, even Dr. Fauci Ouchie is MIA. Not even he's being held accountable. Nobody. Why is that? I mean, this is not conspiracy theory at this point. We all know it's fact. It's proven even by the CDC, Center of Disease Control. They had to admit it all along, even though they're doing their best to cover up the implications of those forced lethal serums. But again, where's accountability?
Yeah, there's a big lack of accountability everywhere, it seems. In my country, I think in the 1970s or the 1980s in Sweden, they got rid of something that is called, the translation is a bit iffy to English, but basically it translates to serviceman responsibility. Now, this serviceman responsibility laws was there to help hold you accountable if you deliberately misled the population or harmed them in some way through deception, right? Or action. And in the 70s or 80s, they simply removed that. And there was not even a debate about it, really. There was a tiny, tiny protest for people who was keeping an eye on it. But the vast majority of the Swedish population, they didn't look to politics. They didn't care about politics because that's what happens when your life is good, when things are just working.
Right.
The trust for the government was at an all-time high. People are just saying the Swedish government is the absolute most wonderful thing that has ever existed. Look at our life standards and everything and so on and so forth, right? So people stop looking. And it is precisely when the population stops looking, whether you're in good times or bad times, that all of these horrible things will start enacting itself right under your noses. And it all started with that. As soon as they removed that, basically what that means is that somebody in the government, I mean, your prime minister or whatever, right, they're allowed to lie to you, to your faces, with no accountability whatsoever. And so if you're going to claim that you are a democracy, right, you can't be. Because in order for a democracy to actually work, the prerequisite for that is that the people of the country has the right information to make a decision based upon. That's why I brought up this point earlier, right? If you can censor, if you have the power to censorship, you can alternate the field of information and thereby control your voters, right?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and that's exactly what we're screaming here. Yeah, I mean, basically, what happens is when again we saw with the truckers, with all these other going back to the lockdown, but this was a major game changer worldwide, instantaneously, simultaneously. Everything changed for everyone in the same way. So yeah, but when we saw people being encouraged, of course, to quit their jobs, like police officers were being told, well, you know what? This is horrible. These things that are being done are horrible. So quit. Leave your job. They were being encouraged to do that. The same thing with the first responders, the medical people. Quit your job if you don't like it. Same thing again with the truckers. Truckers are the backbone of any civilized society, and then some. People don't realize how essential truck drivers are. I did it myself for a while, and I saw the inside of that industry. That's a whole other discussion. So, but they too,
It's a backbone of the economy for sure.
yeah, and of course they too were the ones that were against the system as it was being forced on us. They too were told, you got to leave. So, and the list goes on, and that's what happened. Basically, a void was created that was filled in by people that were complete conformists, just like we saw, we talked about in communist Russia, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
The good thing is that there might be, just like that golem I talked about, where you lose control. I think there's been some consequences that some people are talking about as far as economics, that whole supply and demand thing. Personally, I don't buy it completely because, um, well, they print the money, so they can do whatever they want.
I'm
That's
sorry. What won't you buy? I think I got lost there. What was it that you're not buying?
so it's probably because I'm trying to do two things at once. So that's probably why it's coming out as gibberish. So what I'm saying is that basically, yeah, this void that they're talking about in these major career fields that are obviously, even the military, by the way, the the normal people, let's say, were kind of chased out in high positions because of all these queer changes being made, pun intended. So, and that was being weakened. And I'm talking about U.S. military. I can't speak for other nations. But I imagine if the U.S. is doing it and mass media is pushing it, other nations follow. Yeah. So basically, what I'm saying is those that are talking about mass media's influence and how it's losing. For example, let me show you this one article. This is from Forbes. So um, it's real. It's talking about how Marvel is canceling all these movies. Disney has got all these job layoffs. Paramount, is on a selling block. So the list goes on. Like the American movie industry, um, from an American's perspective, is the last stronghold economically in the world economy. So if you look at it from a competitive perspective globally as an American, the very last thing that you had to count on, which the entertainment industry, is now falling apart and being auctioned off. And why? Because of that corruption that Yuri Bezmenov talked about that moral degradation. It's become so wretched, so stupid, that not even liberals like it. It's that bad. So, and then when that happens, nobody wants to tune in. They're going to lose money. And I'm saying that's the argument of people, of fanboys that are for media, but I've been complaining about these things. But they say the money has been the driving force. I don't believe that. I'm saying that even though these companies are falling apart financially, that they'll continue to do what they do as they're demonstrating. They'll continue to push that same propaganda because they are in bed with the same people that print money, the same people that have the Federal Reserve and so on, as we saw during the U.S. bailouts of 2008, give or take, and then some. The banks and the insurance companies, were just handed money, and how did they come up with all that money? They just started printing it out of nothing, monopoly money. So I don't believe, even though it's arguably great to see such corruption fall apart for 1 second. I think there's.
Well, I think I think it might just be due to. Sorry, I thought you were done.
Yeah, I was like, go ahead.
I think I think partially this is just also part of a natural development, just the same as we went more from regular TV to watching shows on Netflix, for example. Uh, People are finding ways of watching entertainment that is off the standard platforms because they find it more interesting to go on Joe Rogan's podcast, for example, than to sit in front of Netflix, right? And so one reason why you would see a decrease in the Hollywood production materials would simply be that because people are very interested, and the liberals too, right? They would be interested in hating on the conservatives and wanting to what the latest evil neo-Nazi thing they have done, right? For example, right? And I think we're just moving off those platforms a bit gradually, and that probably accounts for a large part of the change.
No, that's very true. And again, that too was, yeah, you're right, absolutely right. That's part of the implications of the lockdown was people, as you said, they're going now to streaming services and internet services and so on. Everyone's now a content creator. I don't know how many students that I teach, young students. I mean, age of 8 years old, that are on different social platforms creating their own videos, and they have way more followers, subscribers than I do. What's that about? Anyway, so yeah, but yeah, so there you go. I mean, you're absolutely right. That's another thing that not too many people talk about. Some have mentioned it, but not too many people talk about that phenomenon.